Thousands of civilians have lost their lives. Countless soldiers have also died. And the United Nations reports more than 4 million refugees have now fled war in Ukraine. To discuss this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining us once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, we've had a couple of ceasefires fall through. Any chance this war will be coming to an end anytime soon?
We have had some here and there, just signs of hope or some signs of both sides wanting to come and sit down to talk. We had a list of 6 items that Putin would want for a ceasefire, and we had Zelensky saying, "Look, I'm ready. I want to sit down for talks right away." But for some reason, we keep moving away from that. We're seeing escalation on both sides. We're seeing, the Ukrainians rolling up their sleeves and doubling down, and we're seeing the Russians bring in another convoy and go after more cities. And obviously, as you said, the devastation, the loss of life, the 4 million refugees who will never have their lives be the same again, the families, the babies, and just seeing the images out of Ukraine. This is a full-fledged war, and for that reason, we don't know when we're going to see an end to it. This is not something that we can say, even if there's a ceasefire, life will go back to, usual. This is going to be something that's ongoing. The building back up again. Finding, survivors and having people find their family members. And on the Russian side, will Putin ever really back down? Will he surrender? We don't think so. And based on, calculations of how he's operated in the past and how he's operating now, yes, there is some sort of miscalculation. Yes, he is changing his tactics. There are reports that he's changing some of his commanders in order to have a different and better, hopefully, strategy on his part. But that just means, we're going to have more war, more devastation, and the optimism that we had throughout this is really not there today.
Now, there are reports as well, Lisa, that Russia has tapped into a decorated general to take control of the war ahead of a potential showdown in eastern Ukraine that could begin within the next few days.
Right. And how this just points to the fact that, yes, the reports all along have been that there has been miscalculation on the Russian part. And I absolutely do believe that that is what has happened. That's why we haven't seen this, have a much quicker turnaround. If you had told me a year ago that, Russia is going to invade Ukraine, I would say it's going to take about 2 days, at most a week. It would never take this long had the Russians, calculated this in the right way. At the same time, it's very hard for me to believe that Putin is not the calculated statesman that he is. All right, let's just say he's surrounded by people that didn't give him the right information. But why wasn't this turned around or improved in the first couple of days or the first couple of weeks even, So we are far into this, and it's taking much longer than anyone has anticipated. A lot of weapons coming in, a lot of weapons. And, it makes one question, what is the end goal here? And for the Russians, yes, they're changing their commanders. They're trying to get, better tactics in. They have an 8-mile convoy, according to satellite reports, going into eastern Ukraine. So it just looks like they are really turning up or amping this up in order to see, more victory on their end. But again, you don't know what to believe. I hear the far desk. We report from the ground as much as we can. We do have 2 journalists there that are reporting to us from what they're seeing, but it's very difficult to piece everything together to have it make sense. But I guess, that's the news cycle these days. It's very difficult to see how things make sense, to get into the psyche of, rogue dictators and see what they're up to, what their end goal is, and how this will end. And really, again, I really want to underscore the humanitarian crisis here and the war, which is really affecting the people on the ground more than ever before in this region.
Now, let's circle back to the weapons for just a moment here. The United States says it's committed to providing Ukraine with the weapons it needs to defend itself against Russia. Now, the White House, Lisa, says it has sent $1.7 billion in military assistance to Ukraine since Russia launched its invasion on February 24th.
Right. And that's the belief for a lot of lawmakers and a lot of those who are in the White House, is to say, obviously, we don't want to have boots on the ground. We don't want to get involved militarily, but we will send them all the resources they need, the Ukrainians need to get the job done. And that is why, the White House has pledged several times already, and again, more recently today, to say that we will send them everything that they need, in addition to the monetary aid that they have pledged, which is the upwards of 1 billion, as you said, close to 2. Now we will see more weapons flying into Ukraine. Look, there is, again, the lawmakers are believing that this is the way to stay out of this. This is a way to prevent escalation by preventing World War III. And you see that talking point thrown around a lot. But the weapons that we're getting there, we've already had reports of these weapons allegedly getting into the wrong hands. They're getting either into the wrong hands on the Ukrainian side. So these are like street thugs that are using them against, common civilians to rob them and mug them and do whatever they want to do. But they're also getting into the wrong hands potentially on the Russian side, because they can confiscate them. And we're just putting more weapons into the system. And obviously more weapons will cause more death and cause more devastation and destruction. So, there's pros and cons on both sides of this argument to keep flooding weapons into Ukraine. But again, here in the United States, that's the belief, that we will give them all the tools necessary for them to get the job done so that we don't have to get involved.
And as you mentioned earlier, this is a huge humanitarian crisis. Ukrainian railways announced that multiple evacuation trains could be seen departing from eastern Ukraine to transport people farther west. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so the goal here is to get people out of Ukraine, and I have interviewed people who tell me all I need is a train ticket or a bus ticket out to the borders. Now, when they get out of Ukraine, then they can basically handle the challenge or the obstacle of getting to wherever they want to go, where their final destination will be. But obviously, the priority is getting themselves out of harm's way and getting themselves out of Ukraine. Now, second step is many have gone to Poland. Poland now has reported that they cannot absorb any more refugees. They are overflowing with refugees. And that is an actual, crisis there, because if they cannot absorb these people, there will be a humanitarian crisis there. There will be lack of supplies, lack of housing, lack of everything else that's necessary to get these refugees settled. So now, as you said, there is this, the strategy now is to move people more west, so that there is no real bottlenecking anywhere, so that these refugees have an actual chance to resettle, to have, whatever they need for themselves and their families. And again, how we had one of our freelance photographers on the ground in Ukraine, we have a 52 photo slideshow of the devastation, and it shows the babies and the families and the, average, Ukrainian trying to stand in line for a supermarket, or trying to just hide in a basement or get to school or anything like that. There is no semblance of normalcy or normal life there at this point. And really that's the real story here.
Now, Russia says it will take legal action if the West tries to force it to default on its sovereign debt, Lisa. Finance Minister Silyanov says they want to ensure that investors receive their payments. What would that actual legal option look like for them?
Yeah, this is hilarious. I mean, hilarious in a very ridiculous way, because imagine, they are so, rogue. They are so, they're such bullies globally that they want to say, look, even now with the sanctions, we're not going to take this. We're going to sue you. That's the actual threat here, is to sue over their economic devastation. So far, Russia has been able to work this system. And the loophole that they have found is that they've been making interest-only payments so that they don't have to default. Once they do have to default, that's when they're saying, we're going to sue because we're not going to be able to obviously function. And it's already been very difficult because the sanctions have been very hard hitting, not only to the billionaires. I know a lot of the articles out there like, we got this guy's yacht and we got this billionaire. Well, the strategy there is to get these billionaires to put pressure on the Russian government to stop Putin from going forward. But really, the real sanctions that have been really devastating for the Russian people has been to stop any sort of imports, to stop any sort of banking infrastructures, to stop credit cards, to stop banks. And that has really taken a toll. So this is the threat. If you take us to the next level, if we have to default, then we're coming after you.
Have you heard any reports of the Russian oligarchs trying to overthrow the Putin government? Tried to take control and stop this war once and for all?
Yes, it's interesting you say that. We actually had an article up at the Foreign Desk last week talking about how the oligarchs are working together with the opposition to push Putin out of office, and they have already found his replacement. The replacement is the estranged commander who was in charge of the Ukraine strategy that Putin has now had a huge falling out with. There's a rift between them that is very, very serious because Putin has tried to blame him for the poor strategy of invading Ukraine. The opposition and as well as the oligarchs believe that this guy could be a good replacement for Putin and is trying to obviously, muster up some support or get some popularity behind this idea or this movement. Obviously, you know how Russia is. If anyone tries to even speak poorly about Putin or report about him, these journalists are taken out. The publications are shut down. These opposition members are arrested. So this is not something that can go over easy on the ground in Russia, but this is the idea that is floating around.
Lisa, there's a report coming out from the Wall Street Journal that China is stockpiling nuclear weapons capable of striking us right here in North America. The communist country is reportedly accelerating the development of more than 100 suspected missile silos.
And when we're not looking, let's look what's going on right under our noses, right? So China, obviously, the most informed satellite reports and the most informed experts tell us not to take our eyes off of China, and that will always be the biggest global threat. It's not going to be, all of these other things that we're focused on, whether it's our southern border or if it's, some sort of dossier, or we're looking at internal politics here in the United States or whatever it may be. But really, China is the biggest global threat because they are committed to taking out North America. They are committed to taking out the West, and they're committed to becoming the biggest world power. And guess what? They are well on their way. And this report is not very reassuring when we know that they are stockpiling and they're growing their military assets, and that this is their plan. Look, they've been very straightforward about it. We can't blame them for the lack of transparency, because look, they have been straightforward about wanting to take us out. Now, we didn't go hard on them with the COVID lack of transparency. We didn't go, after them for their, economic loopholing and taking advantage of the West. And now, we see that they're growing their influence in the region, in the China Sea and the Red Sea, and they are, their neighbors are really worried about this threat, about the Chinese growing their influence, and they're going to start regionally and they will expand. They want global influence, and they're buying influence in other places. You look at the African continent, you look at the Middle East, they're buying roads and infrastructures, they're buying the internet, the telecommunications lines. This is what they want. They want influence, and they are well on their way. So all eyes on China. This is not a threat that we can take our eyes off of.
There are other reports now that Israeli forces had to deal with a number of terrorist incidents across the country recently. Lisa, police carried out large arrest raids in the northern West Bank targeting Palestinian terrorists.
Yes, this is awful. And I thank you, Hal, for covering this, because we don't see this in the mainstream media. We will begin to see it in the mainstream media when Israel has to start to retaliate. And then you will see the tanks rolling in, and then you will see reports of disproportionate response by Israel. And for some reason, the mainstream media is completely, set on covering this story in a certain way with a certain narrative. You don't see the Palestinian terrorist that went into a bar in Tel Aviv on Thursday night and killed 3 young men, young men. One had recently just got engaged and was going to celebrate his engagement with his best friend. All of them young, with one of them having 3 young kids, the other 2 being under 30 years old. And this past 10 days, we've had more than 14 or 15 casualties just like this. Normal people going to the supermarket, going to a bar, walking the streets, and nothing's done, nothing is said. And the global media, again, is very silent about all of this. But the IDF has been able to neutralize some of these terrorists. And you'll see people like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and AOC here, lawmakers that were voted in to defend, obviously, the United States and our ally Israel, but instead are defending these terrorists and talking about how Israel is neutralizing, but not talking about the woman who tried to stab a police officer right before she was neutralized. They only talk about the shooting of this woman. But anyway, this is what is going on. This is yet another flare up. We don't know if we're going to call this the third intifada, but it is yet another flare up in Israel. And we pray for the people there that are just leading ordinary lives and are now fearful to come out of their homes to do very ordinary things for fear of being shot, being blown up, for fear of these terrorists who are hell-bent on killing them.
A big election is taking place in France, with incumbent Emmanuel Macron facing stiff competition from far-right nationalist Marine Le Pen in a winner-takes-all runoff for the French presidency, Lisa.
Very interesting. This always it fascinates me, the way that we're seeing Europe move more to the right. The only reason I say that is because if this were 10 years ago, you wouldn't even see a far right candidate even have a chance or even make it to this far in the primaries to be on the ballot for the election. We know, obviously, Macron wants this very badly. He has taken some very bold actions in terms of their foreign policy. He went to meet with Putin. He tried to be the mediator there. It didn't work too well, but obviously his name is out there, and obviously the French people see what he is doing and seeing that he is, really making an effort for peace between Ukraine and Russia. But again, the fact that there is a far-right candidate tells me that Europeans see the damage of these lax policies by the left and is moving to the right and giving more politicians on the right a chance to bring in that nationalism, to close their borders, to not be so lax on immigration and other policies. So it's definitely a wake-up call for France and many other European nations.
Foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, thanks so much for joining us from Los Angeles.
My pleasure.